Imagine being 14 years old and your body is already doing things no other teenager on the planet can do. Imagine hitting a ball so hard that goalkeepers don't even bother diving. Imagine scoring hat tricks the way most people eat breakfast, routinely, effortlessly, like breathing. Now imagine that none of it came easy, that behind the superhuman numbers, behind the cold, mechanical efficiency, behind the ice blue stare of a man who seems built in a factory rather than born in a hospital, there is a story of a boy who grew up in the shadow of a legend, who was told he was too big, too slow, too raw. A story that will shake everything you think you know about football, genetics, and the raw, relentless power of obsession. This is not just the story of a footballer. This is the story of a machine that was once a child. This is the story of Erling Haaland. And there are players who are good at football. There are players who are great at football. And then once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime, there is someone who makes you question whether football was even designed for them. Someone so dominant, so freakishly efficient at putting the ball in the net, that analysts run out of comparisons, coaches run out of answers, and defenders, well, defenders just run. Erling brought Haaland, born on the 21st of July, 2000, in Leeds, England. Yes, England. The man who would go on to terrorize the Premier League was actually born on English soil, though his roots run deep through the mountains and fjords of Norway. His father, Erling Haaland, was a professional footballer himself, a midfielder who played for clubs like Nottingham Forest, Manchester City, and the Norwegian national team. His mother, Gry Tabrad, was a heptathlete, a multidiscipline track and field athlete. So when people say Erling Haaland was born to be an athlete, they are not speaking metaphorically. They are stating biological fact. But here is something that doesn't get talked about enough. Being born into a sporting family does not guarantee greatness. History is full of footballers' sons who never made it, full of athletes' children who had every advantage in the world and still faded into obscurity. The genes are just the raw material. What you do with them, that's the story. And Erling Haaland's story begins not with triumph, but with a town, a small, quiet town in Norway called Bryn, population around 12,000 people, a place where football is not a spectator sport, it is a way of life, where kids grow up kicking balls in the cold Nordic air, dreaming of names like Ronaldo, Beckenbauer, and yes, a father who once wore the jerseys of professional clubs across England. Erling grew up in Bryn watching his father play, and for the first few years of his life, everything seemed perfect. The family was well known, respected. Erling Haaland was a local hero. Erling got to go to stadiums, sit in changing rooms, feel the electricity of professional football from the inside. Other kids dreamed of being footballers. Erling lived inside that dream before he was old enough to fully understand it. But then something happened that would shape Erling's relationship with football forever, and it did not happen to him. It happened to his father. In the year 2001, when Erling was just a baby, his father Alfie was playing for Manchester City. It was a fiercely contested match against Leeds United, and in that game, Roy Keane, the legendary, ferociously competitive Manchester United captain, made a tackle on Erling Haaland that would end his career, not just injure him. The tackle was so severe, so targeted, that Erling Haaland's knee was destroyed. He never played professional football properly again. Roy Keane later admitted in his autobiography that the tackle was deliberate retribution for an incident years earlier, when Alfie had stood over Keane after he went down injured. Whether you condemn it or try to understand it within football's brutal context, the result was the same. A man's career was over, a family's life was changed, and a small boy in Norway would grow up knowing that football could take everything away in a single second. Erling Haaland grew up hearing this story. He grew up watching his father limp. He grew up knowing what the game could cost. And perhaps, that is part of what makes him play with the ferocity he does. The relentlessness, the refusal to take a single moment for granted. When Erling was very young, his mother noticed something unusual. He wasn't just energetic, the way all children are. He was specifically, almost obsessively, drawn to balls, to movement, to competition. The family enrolled him in sports activities early, and it became clear very quickly that this child had something. a coordination that shouldn't exist in a body that young, a spatial awareness that adults spend years developing, an intensity that other kids simply didn't carry. He started playing organized football at Brighton FK, the local club his father had also come through. This is not a glamorous academy. This is not Barcelona's La Masia or Manchester City's state-of-the-art Etihad campus. This is a community club in a small Norwegian town, with humble facilities, local coaches, and kids who play for the love of the game. There is something beautiful about that, something deeply human, and even in that modest setting, Erling stood out. Not because he was scoring 40 goals a season at age 10, not because he was already a finished product. He stood out because of the hunger, because of the way he approached every single training session like it was a final, because of the cold, burning desire that his coaches could see in his eyes, even before his body was ready to execute what his mind was demanding. His youth teammates remember him as competitive to the point of being unusual. He didn't just want to win, he needed to win. He would practice free kicks alone for hours after training ended. He would ask coaches questions that teenagers don't typically ask about positioning, about runs, about the geometry of attacking space. He wasn't just playing football, he was studying it, obsessing over it, consuming it. And yet, for all his talent, for all his drive, Erling Haaland was not considered a certainty, not even close. Here is where the story takes a turn that most people gloss over. When Erling Haaland was in his mid-teens, a lot of scouts and coaches had significant doubts about him. Not about his finishing, not about his mentality, about his body. Erling had grown extraordinarily fast. By the time he was 15 or 16, he was already approaching 6 feet tall and still growing. He was big, powerful, but in the world of youth football development, big and powerful can actually be a problem. Big kids rely on physical dominance. They use their size rather than developing the technical skills that will matter when everyone around them catches up physically. Elite academies had seen this pattern 1,000 times. A tall, strong kid dominates youth football, but when opponents grow into their own bodies, the physical advantage disappears and the technical deficit becomes fatal. The question around Haaland was blunt: is this kid the real deal, or is he just big? And there were clubs, good clubs, professional clubs, who decided he wasn't worth the risk. He went to trials, he had assessments, and some of those ended with polite rejections. Some of them ended with coaches pulling his father aside and suggesting, as tactfully as possible, that perhaps Erling's future lay somewhere other than professional football. Think about that for a moment. Think about sitting in a room and being told that your dream, the thing you've dedicated your childhood to, the thing your father's whole career was built around, the thing you've practiced until your feet bled and your lungs burned, might not be for you. Erling Haaland heard versions of that message, and he did not crumble. He did not redirect his energy into something safer. He went back to training, harder, longer, more focused. He moved to Molde FK, another Norwegian club, to continue his development, and it was there, under a manager who would go on to have a profound impact on his career, that things began to change. That manager was Gunnar Solskjaer. Gunnar Solskjaer, the man known as the baby-faced assassin, during his own playing days at Manchester United, a striker who understood, at a cellular level, what it meant to score goals, what it meant to be in the right place at the right time, what the space behind a defensive line looks like from the inside. Solskjaer saw in Haaland something that others had doubted. He saw a player who was raw, yes, who had things to work on, absolutely, but who possessed the fundamental ingredients of a great striker in quantities he had rarely seen before. He could see in Erling's runs, in his movement, in his clinical finishing, the architecture of something extraordinary. He gave Erling time, he gave him belief, he gave him space to make mistakes without fear. At Molde, Haaland began to find himself. He made his professional debut in 2017. He started contributing to the team. He started scoring. Not in torrents, not yet, but consistently enough to turn heads. Consistently enough for bigger clubs to start paying attention. And then came the moment that changed everything. In 2019, the FIFA Under-20 World Cup was held in Poland. Norway qualified, and Erling Haaland was part of the squad. The tournament was a chance for the world's best young players to announce themselves on a global stage, And Erling Haaland did not just announce himself, he detonated. In a single group stage match against Honduras, Erling Haaland scored 9 goals. 9. In a single game. Norway won 13-0, and 9 of those goals had Haaland's name next to them. It was one of the most extraordinary individual performances in the tournament's history. Commentators struggled to find the words. Football Twitter simply broke. Within hours, his name was everywhere. But here's the thing about that performance that gets overlooked in all the highlight reel celebration. It wasn't just the goals. It was the different types of goals. Headers, left foot, right foot, tap-ins from smart positioning, long-range efforts, goals from wide angles. It was a complete, multidimensional demonstration of a striker who had been working on every tool in the toolbox. It wasn't volume for the sake of volume. It was surgical, comprehensive, devastating finishing. The next morning, virtually every major club in Europe knew Erling Haaland's name. Treble Salzburg moved quickly. They had already signed him before the tournament, and that performance confirmed they had found something special. At Salzburg, under intense tactical development, Haaland exploded. In the 2019-2020 Champions League group stages against clubs with far greater resources and experience, the teenager was unstoppable. He scored in his first 5 Champions League games. He was dismantling defenses that had been carefully assembled to handle the best players in Europe, and the phone calls from the biggest clubs in the world started coming. Borussia Dortmund moved. They moved decisively. They moved intelligently. And in January 2020, Erling Haaland signed for the German Giants for a fee that now looks like one of the great bargains in football history. On his debut, he came on as a substitute and scored a hat-trick. A hat-trick on his debut. The Dortmund fans hadn't seen anything. They were about to. The Dortmund years were something close to a controlled experiment in football genius. Haaland had an extraordinary manager in Lucien Favre initially, and then Edin Terzic. He had technical teammates who could feed him. He had a system built around quick, vertical, counter-attacking football that suited his movement perfectly. And he had something else for the first time in his career. He had a stage big enough for his talent. The numbers from his time at Dortmund are almost offensive to the concept of normal human performance. In the Bundesliga and Champions League, he scored at a rate that statistical analysts said was not just historically unusual, it was historically unprecedented for a player his age. He was winning Bundesliga Player of the Month awards. He was winning Champions League Player of the Match awards. He was scoring hat-tricks with the frequency that other players score individual goals. Against Paris Saint-Germain, in the Champions League round of 16, he scored twice in the first leg. In the second leg, with Dortmund already at a disadvantage, he continued to be the team's lifeline, their weapon, their source of chaos in an otherwise controlled game. Against Sevilla, against Borussia Mönchengladbach, against Freiburg, the performances kept coming. And yet, Dortmund could not win the Bundesliga title. They came close. They had moments. But Bayern Munich's dominance of German football kept them from the ultimate domestic prize. And in the Champions League, the deeper runs kept eluding them. The question started to emerge: was Haaland the kind of player who could lead a team to the very highest level? Or would he need an even bigger stage, an even stronger team, to finally cross those final few mountains? The answer came in the summer of 2022. Manchester City, Pep Guardiola. If you want to understand what happened when those two things collided, Erling Haaland and Manchester City under Pep Guardiola, you need to understand what each side brought to the partnership. Manchester City had spent years being arguably the best team in England, and arguably the best club team in Europe. They had won Premier League title after Premier League title. They had a squad filled with players who operated at a level of technical and tactical sophistication that was genuinely without parallel. They passed the ball with a precision that looked like choreography. They pressed and recovered with a synchronicity that looked like telepathy. But they had one very specific problem. They didn't have a striker. For several seasons, Guardiola had famously and controversially played a system without a traditional number 9. He used attacking midfielders and wide forwards to try to replace the function of a center forward. It worked, largely, but it left goals on the table. It left a very specific type of threat absent, the player who lives in the penalty area, who haunts centre-backs in their dreams, who can take the most difficult chance in the most pressured moment and put the ball in the net with cold, absolute certainty. Haaland was that player. The fee was around 60 million euros again, a number that now seems almost comically low given what followed. And from his very first Premier League game, Haaland made it clear that he intended to be a different kind of force in England. He scored twice on his Premier League debut, and then he just kept going. The 2022-2023 Premier League season became one of the most jaw-dropping individual campaigns in the history of English football. By Christmas, the conversations had already started. Could he break the Premier League scoring record? The record, held by Andrew Cole and Alan Shearer, stood at 34 goals in a single season, a record set with 38 games available. It had stood for nearly 3 decades as a monument to sustained excellence. Haaland didn't just break it, he shattered it. He finished the 2022-2023 Premier League season with 36 goals, 36 in 35 appearances. He also contributed 8 assists. His goals per 90-minute ratio was at a level that made football statisticians simply stop and stare. Expected goals models, the sophisticated mathematical tools used to evaluate finishing quality, showed that Haaland was consistently scoring goals that shouldn't have been goals. He was outperforming probability. He was finishing chances that the data set should have been saved 7 or 8 times out of 10. But here's what made it more than numbers. Here's what made it feel like something being sport. He won the treble with Manchester City, the Premier League, the FA Cup, the Champions League, the trophy that had eluded the club for decades, that Guardiola had been hunting since his arrival. In the Champions League final, against Inter Milan in Istanbul, Manchester City won. Haaland was there. He contributed. The greatest club trophy in European football was in his hands before he had turned 23 years old. Let's pause here for a moment, because in telling the story of what Erling Haaland has achieved, it becomes very easy to make him sound like a machine, as cold and efficient as the nickname suggests. The analytics, the records, the goals per game ratios, they can make you forget that behind all of it is an actual human being. A young man who grew up with doubts and fears, and a father's injured leg, as a constant reminder of football's cruelty. Erling Haaland is, by all accounts from those who know him, a remarkably simple person, and that word is meant with the deepest respect. He is not complex in the way that torture geniuses sometimes are. He doesn't need constant psychological reassurance. He doesn't require elaborate motivational speeches from his manager. He finds his peace in simplicity. He sleeps famously and strategically for enormous amounts. He manages his diet with the precision of a professional nutritionist. He avoids the nightclub scene, the parties, the trappings of celebrity that have derailed so many talented young players. He lives in a comfortable home. He drives nice cars. He enjoys the life his talent has built for him. But people who have spent time around him describe a man who is, at his core, still the kid from Brian who just loves scoring goals, who finds genuine, uncomplicated joy in the act of putting the ball in the net. His relationship with his family remains central to everything. His father Alfie, despite the injury that ended his career, has been a presence throughout Erling's journey. There is no bitterness there, or if there is, it has been alchemized into fuel, into the burning need to be the best, into making sure that the Haaland name in football means not just Alfie's career, but Erling's legacy. His mother Grimari Ta, whose own athletic DNA runs through Erling's physique and endurance, has been a quiet but constant support. The family unit has remained tight, grounded, and unpretentious despite everything that fame and money can do to families. Erling has also been involved in charitable work, though he does it without fanfare. He understands that being in the position he occupies carries responsibility. He has supported local causes in Norway. He has participated in initiatives to make football more accessible. He doesn't announce it loudly. He doesn't need the publicity. He just does it, the way he does everything, directly, without fuss, without performance. Ain't there have been controversies. There have been moments of friction. In his early career, there were critics who accused him of disappearing in games where the service dried up. Fair enough, he's a striker, fundamentally dependent on what his teammates provide. And there were matches in the Champions League with Manchester City where the goals didn't come, where the physical battle became too much, where he looked, briefly, mortal. There were also questions about his future at City, as he approaches what should be his absolute peak years. There have been ongoing transfer rumors. Real Madrid have been mentioned. Barcelona have been mentioned. The inevitable speculation about whether he will test himself in Spain, whether he craves the individual awards that are easier to collect at certain clubs, whether he has ambitions beyond being part of Guardiola's system. And then there is the strange, beautiful tension between Haaland and the concept of rivalry. He doesn't have a rival in the traditional sense, not because no one is good enough to rival him. Kylian Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. and others are genuinely extraordinary players, but because Haaland seems to exist in his own competitive ecosystem. He doesn't race others, he races records. He doesn't measure himself against his contemporaries, he measures himself against history. When journalists try to provoke comparisons, he deflects them with disarming calm. When asked about individual awards, he says he cares about team trophies. Whether that is entirely true, only he knows, but the consistency with which he says it, and the way he performs in crucial team moments, suggests there is real conviction behind it. The question of legacy is a tricky one to ask of a man who, at the time this documentary is being written, is still only in his early 20s. The story is unfinished. The final chapters haven't been written, and any honest football fan will tell you, you cannot fully write the legacy of someone who still has a decade of elite football ahead of them. But what can already be said is significant. Erling Haaland has changed the conversation about what a modern striker can be. In an era where the position of center forward was being declared obsolete, where coaches were moving away from the traditional number 9 in favor of false nines and fluid attacking systems, Haaland arrived and reasserted the position's dominance with such force that the discussion stopped dead. You cannot argue against 40 goals in a Premier League season. You cannot philosophically dismiss a player who is outscoring entire teams. He has also, and this matters enormously, made the case for a different kind of elite mentality. In an era of constant social media performance, constant personal branding, constant noise, Haaland is conspicuously quiet. His personality is not built on controversy or heat. He is not trying to make headlines with his opinions. He is making headlines with his football. Only with his football. And there is something almost revolutionary about that in the modern sporting landscape. He has inspired a generation of Norwegian children to believe that their country can produce football superstars. Norway, a country with a population of barely 5 million people, now has a household name at the absolute summit of world football. That has consequences. Those consequences will take 20 years to fully play out in youth academies and training pitches across Scandinavia. He has shown that you can come from a small town. You can be doubted. You can be told your body is wrong. You can carry the weight of a father's broken career and a country's expectations, and you can still arrive at the absolute top, not despite those things. Maybe, just maybe, because of them. There is a moment that gets talked about in football coaching circles. It happened in training at Manchester City. And while the specifics vary depending on who tells the story, the essence is always the same. A drill was set up, a defensive scenario. Haaland was given a single touch and a narrow angle. It was the kind of situation where the percentage play, the sensible play, the professional play is to lay the ball off, retain possession, keep the move alive. Haaland shot. He scored. The goalkeeper had no chance. When the coach pointed out that the percentage play was the pass, Haaland's response was simple. He said something to the effect of, the percentage play for other strikers might be the pass. For him, the shot is always the highest percentage option. That tells you everything. That's not arrogance. That is a man who has done the reps, who has put in the hours, who has practiced that shot from that angle in that scenario so many thousands of times that his confidence in his own ability is not belief, it is calculation. It is data. He knows what he can do, and he does it. That is the machine. That is the product of years of obsession and sacrifice, a refusal to accept the narrative that someone else wrote for him. Standing back and looking at everything, the small town in Norway, the father's ruin, the doubts of scouts and coaches, The 9 goals against Honduras, the 36 Premier League goals, the Champions League trophy, the records falling like dominoes. You are left with one overwhelming feeling: gratitude. Gratitude that we get to watch this. Gratitude that in a world full of complexity and noise and uncertainty, there is a young man from Bryn, Norway, who wakes up every single morning with one clear, uncomplicated mission: to score the next goal, to be better than he was yesterday, to honor his father's memory by writing a story that is fully, triumphantly his own. Football has given us many great strikers. It has given us Ronaldo and Messi and Thierry Henry, and Ronaldo Nazario and Gunnar, men who redefined what the position could mean. But Erling Haaland is not trying to be any of them. He is trying to be something entirely new, something the game has never quite seen before. The marriage of physical devastation and technical precision, the combination of raw power and analytical calm, the striker who scores with his left foot, his right foot, and his head with equal authority, and who gets up the next morning and does it again. He's 23 years old. He has decades of football ahead of him. The records he hasn't broken yet are temporary. The trophies he hasn't won yet are waiting. And somewhere in Norway, there is a father watching his son play with a mixture of feelings that no interview has ever fully captured. Pride, obviously. Obviously. But maybe something deeper. Something that knows, with the intimacy of someone who has lived inside professional football and felt what it can take away. Something that knows what it means to watch a child turn pain into purpose. Alfie Haaland's career ended on a football pitch in 2001. A tackle, a knee, a dream, interrupted. Erling Haaland's story is just beginning. The machine keeps running, and the goals keep coming. This has been The Machine Northeast, Erling Haaland's full documentary. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that behind every extraordinary achievement, there is an extraordinary amount of ordinary effort, share it. Leave a comment. Tell us what moment in Haaland's journey hit you hardest. And subscribe, because there are more stories like this one. Stories that prove that football is never just football. It is always something more.